Hello, my name is Mason. I'm 29 years old and work as a financial analyst at a company in Columbus, Ohio, a steady city positioned in the heart of America where highways intersect. Through rolling hills and the autumn air carries the scent of burning leaves. Unlike the frenetic energy of New York or the sun-soaked glamour of Los Angeles, Columbus has the measured pace of the Midwest, where people still hold doors open for strangers and know their mail carrier by name. Yet for me, Columbus has never truly felt like home. I grew up here in what I call my guardian's house, but ever since I was a child, I've always felt like an unwanted guest at someone else's table. I don't remember much about how I came to live with my Aunt Patricia and Uncle Richard. The stories of my early childhood were only shared through bitter remarks during moments when Patricia was particularly frustrated with me. "We took you in when no one else would," she would often say, her tone suggesting I owed her everything. "Your mother couldn't be bothered to raise you herself." I was taken in as a toddler, barely 2 years old. My guardians, Richard and Patricia, were well established, living in a sprawling colonial house in the suburbs of Columbus, with a manicured lawn and fresh mulch around the flower beds each spring. They had 2 biological children, Derek, 3 years younger than me, and Sophie, 6 years my junior. On paper, I was part of this family, but in their hearts, I was merely an obligation. From a young age, I noticed I was different. It wasn't just that my hazel eyes or sandy brown hair didn't match anyone else's in the family, though that did make me wonder about my origins. The difference lay in how they treated me. During school events, Patricia would introduce Derek and Sophie as her son and daughter. But when it came to me, she'd simply say, "This is Mason, my sister's boy." The word nephew was technically accurate, but the way she said it made clear I was a burden, not a blessing. I remember one time when I was about 8, standing in the doorway during a family holiday party. Everyone was gathered for photos in front of the fireplace decorated with garland and stockings. But when I tried to join, Sophie pushed me back. "This is for real, family," she said, her tone mimicking her mother's dismissiveness. Patricia just smiled, adjusted Sophie's dress, and continued posing for pictures. I stood there watching the twinkling lights, feeling like the whole world was celebrating while I was permanently uninvited. All my efforts to belong were futile. I excelled in school consistently, making honor roll, bringing home awards that ended up in a drawer rather than displayed. I did extra chores without being asked, learned to cook Patricia's favorite recipes, even taught myself to fix things around the house. But all I received were brief nods or a muttered fine. Once I overheard Patricia talking to Richard in their bedroom when they thought I was asleep. "He only behaves because he knows we could send him away. We gave him a roof over his head. That's more than Karen ever did for him." Those words cut deep into my young heart. Karen, my mother's name, spoken like a curse. I wasn't their nephew by choice. I was a responsibility they'd been stuck with. But there was one person in this world who made me feel like I truly mattered. My grandfather, William. He lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Cincinnati, about 2 hours south, where old neighborhoods blend into farmland and the Ohio River winds through the valley. Every summer when school let out, I was sent to stay with him. Those were the only months I felt truly alive, genuinely loved. Grandpa never called me Mason in that clipped, formal way. To him, I was Buddy, or my boy. He taught me woodworking in his garage that smelled of sawdust and varnish, showed me how to fish in the creek behind his property, and on humid evenings we'd sit on his back porch playing checkers, while fireflies danced in the yard, and he'd tell stories about his younger days working the railroads. Grandpa was the only one who truly saw me. When I was 13, I sat with him on that same porch, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. I finally asked Grandpa, "Why don't Aunt Patricia and Uncle Richard want me?" He stopped mid-move on the checkerboard, placing his weathered hand on my shoulder. His eyes, lined with years of wisdom, studied me carefully. "Mason," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you're more precious than they realize. Don't let their blindness dim your light. You're meant for bigger things than their small hearts can hold." Those words became my anchor through the darkest times. I also remember another evening when Grandpa took me to the old covered bridge near his house. As we watched the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, he suddenly asked, "Do you ever wonder about your mother?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought much about her. Patricia always said my mother Karen was selfish and irresponsible, that I was better off without her. But Grandpa's eyes held secrets and sadness that made my pulse quicken. "I don't know," I replied, my voice uncertain. "Patricia says she didn't want me." Grandpa squeezed my shoulder. "Never believe that, Mason. There are truths that haven't been told yet, but someday everything will come to light." Those cryptic words planted questions in my mind, a sense that my life contained mysteries larger than I could grasp. But the warmth of those summers with Grandpa couldn't erase the coldness waiting for me in Columbus. Each time I returned, I faced the same indifference. Derek always treated me like competition, not worth acknowledging. He'd exclude me from plans with his friends, referring to me as the charity case when he thought adults couldn't hear. Sophie was subtler. She wasn't openly mean, but her eyes always held that distance, as if I were a stranger who happened to live in her house. I tried not to let it break me. I told myself that if I worked harder, achieved more, behaved perfectly, someday they'd see me differently. But deep down I knew that hope was as fragile as morning frost. Every morning I woke up in my small bedroom at the back of the house, the only one without a view of the tree-lined street. Derek and Sophie had large rooms with private bathrooms and walls covered in posters and achievements, while mine held just a twin bed, a second-hand desk, and a lamp that flickered when the house settled. I didn't complain. I'd learned that complaints only made Patricia purse her lips and remind me, "You should be grateful for what you have." But every time I walked down those stairs, I felt like a boarder in someone else's life. There's one memory that still stings. When I was 15, the family threw a Sweet 16 party for Sophie. The house filled with pink decorations, a 3-tier cake, and dozens of her friends. I'd spent weeks in Grandpa's garage that previous summer learning to carve, and I'd made her a jewelry box from cherry wood, sanding it smooth and adding a hidden compartment. I wrapped it carefully and placed it among the pile of gifts. When Sophie opened it, she glanced at the box, said, "Thanks," without looking at me, then moved on to designer clothes and electronics from her parents and friends. Patricia didn't even acknowledge my gift. I stood against the wall, feeling invisible. Later that night, I found the jewelry box shoved under Sophie's bed, already dusty. I retrieved it, cleaned it off, and kept it in my closet. That was the last time I tried to earn their affection through gifts. Another painful moment came when I was 17. I'd decided to do something to make Richard proud. He owned a small accounting firm and often complained about outdated filing systems. I taught myself database management, spent months creating a digital system that could streamline his work. When I showed him excited to contribute, he barely glanced at it. "Don't mess with my business, Mason. You don't understand how things work." I stood there feeling hollow. I wanted to explain that I'd researched extensively, that the system could save him hours each week, but the words wouldn't come. I deleted the files that night and never mentioned it again. My adolescence passed like that, a series of warm summers with Grandpa and cold seasons in a house that never felt like home. I learned to hide my feelings, to smile even when excluded, to be grateful for the roof over my head, even if it never felt like shelter. I told myself that one day I'd find where I truly belonged. As I turned 18, the opportunity to leave Columbus came like a life raft. I received a full scholarship to Ohio State University, right there in Columbus, but far enough from Patricia and Richard's suburb to feel like escape. The campus sprawled across the city, thousands of students, creating a world where I could reinvent myself. On the day I moved into the dorms, Patricia stood in my doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Don't embarrass us," she said, as if I were a reflection of them rather than my own person. Richard barely looked up from his laptop to nod goodbye. Derek smirked from his room, probably happy to have one less person to share anything with. Only Sophie seemed slightly sad, but she said nothing. I loaded my few boxes into my beat-up Honda Civic, my heart heavy but hopeful. Maybe by leaving I'd find where I truly belonged. University was a revelation. On campus, no one knew me as the unwanted nephew or the charity case. I threw myself into my studies, choosing finance because numbers made sense in a way people often didn't. Late nights in the library complex, problem sets, group projects, they were all chances to prove my worth, not to Patricia and Richard, but to myself. I worked part-time at a campus bookstore, then later at a small investment firm downtown, saving every dollar so I'd never have to ask my guardians for anything. I wanted to stand completely on my own to show that I didn't need their grudging support to succeed. But no matter how busy I kept myself, loneliness crept in during quiet moments. Lying in my dorm bed, listening to my roommate talk to his parents on the phone with easy affection, I wondered if Patricia and Richard ever thought about me beyond obligation. I sent dutiful emails updating them on my grades, sharing that I'd made the dean's list or been selected for an internship. Their responses were predictably brief. Good. Keep it up. Patricia. I saved those emails not because they brought comfort, but as evidence that I'd tried. Every summer I drove straight to Grandpa William's house instead of Columbus. Those months remained my sanctuary. Grandpa was getting older, his movements slower, his hair completely silver, but his eyes still sparkled when he saw me. We spent long evenings on his porch, the Ohio humidity thick around us, and he'd share wisdom between checker moves. Sometimes he'd say things that puzzled me. You're more like your grandmother than you know Mason. She had your determination, your spirit. I'd ask him to tell me more about her, about my mother, about why things were the way they were. But he'd just pat my hand and say, "When the time is right, buddy, when the time is right." In my senior year of college, I graduated summa cum laude, top of my finance program. At the commencement ceremony, I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, accepting my diploma to thunderous applause. But inside I felt hollow. I had sent Patricia and Richard invitations, even called to remind them of the date and time. "We have a conflict," Patricia had said over the phone, her voice betraying no regret, but congratulations. I scanned the crowd where other families were cheering, taking pictures, embracing their graduates with pride. Only Grandpa was there, sitting in the middle section, wearing his best button-down shirt and dress pants. When I stepped off the stage, he pulled me into a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "So very proud." I smiled, but tears burned my eyes. It was the first time I'd cried in public in years. After graduation, I accepted a position at a respected financial firm in Columbus. I chose to stay in the city not for Patricia and Richard, but to remain close to Grandpa. The years that followed were about building my career and identity. I threw myself into the work analyzing markets, managing portfolios, earning a reputation for reliability and sharp insights. Colleagues started calling me Steady Mason because I never seemed rattled by market volatility or office politics. But they didn't know that every night I returned to my one-bedroom apartment near German Village, I sat in silence, sometimes playing the old jazz records Grandpa had given me, wondering if this was what success was supposed to feel like. As my income grew, I started sending Patricia and Richard a check each month. Not because they needed it, their house and lifestyle suggested comfort, but because I thought it might be a way to balance the scales. Each check was cashed, but the only acknowledgement was a brief text received. Thanks. Derek had dropped out of community college and spent his days gaming and living off his parents. Sophie had finished her degree in marketing but seemed more interested in being an influencer than finding actual work. Neither had moved out. I didn't judge them. I just hoped that maybe they'd eventually see me as more than the cousin who'd taken up space in their house. 6 years into my career, I was promoted to senior analyst. It was a significant achievement, higher salary, more responsibility, a corner cubicle with a view of the Columbus skyline. Yet the accomplishment felt muted. I thought about family, not the house in suburban Columbus, but about belonging somewhere, truly belonging. Then an idea took hold. Thanksgiving dinner. It's supposed to be about gratitude, about family coming together. I decided to host a dinner to bring everyone together in a way that might finally bridge the distance between us. I spent weeks planning. I made reservations at the Refectory, one of Columbus's finest restaurants, housed in a converted church with stained glass windows and white tablecloths. I reserved a private dining room for 6, Patricia, Richard, Derek, Sophie, Grandpa, and me. I sent formal invitations on cream cardstock, writing personal notes to each person. Dear Aunt Patricia, I would be honored if you'd join me for Thanksgiving dinner. Your presence would mean everything to me. I texted Derek and Sophie asking them to save the date, telling them how much I looked forward to celebrating together. I even called Richard at his office, explaining how much I hoped he could attend. I'll check my calendar, he said, in his usual flat tone. I didn't let it discourage me. I worked with the restaurant to plan the perfect menu: her roasted turkey, sweet potato souffle, cranberry compote, all the traditional dishes I knew they enjoyed. A hope flickered in my chest. Maybe this time would be different. On Thanksgiving Day, I stood before my bathroom mirror, adjusting my maroon tie against the charcoal suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I looked into my own hazel eyes, seeing my mother's features that Patricia had always said were nothing like the family. Today will be different, I told my reflection. Today they'll see me. I arrived at the Refectory early at 5:00 p.m. as the November sun cast long shadows across High Street. The maitre d', an elegant woman with silver hair, led me to the private room I'd reserved. Everything was perfect ivory linens, 6 place settings with multiple forks and crystal glasses, candles creating a warm ambiance against the dark wood paneling. Your family must be wonderful, a server commented while filling water glasses. I nodded, trying to quiet the anxiety building in my chest. Yeah, I hope so. I sat down, checking my watch. 6:00 p.m., our reservation time. The restaurant filled with the sounds of other families arriving, laughter echoing through the historic building, the clink of glasses in toasts. I checked my phone. No messages, no calls. They might be running late, I told myself, though my hands had started to sweat. I texted Sophie. Hey, I'm here at the restaurant. Are you all on your way? No response. I tried calling Derek, but it went straight to voicemail. Hey Derek, I'm at the Refectory waiting. Hope you're almost here. No one called back. By 6:30, a familiar dread settled in my stomach. The tables visible through the doorway were full of families sharing stories, grandparents bouncing grandchildren on their knees, teenagers rolling their eyes at parental jokes, but smiling despite themselves. I stared at my empty table, the 6 chairs sitting vacant, like accusations. I called Patricia, my hands trembling as I dialed. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. Mason. Her voice was as cold as November rain. Aunt Patricia, I'm at the restaurant. Is everyone? Are you coming? Oh, that. Richard's not feeling up to going out, and we've already started eating here. You'll be fine on your own, won't you? In the background, I heard Sophie laughing at something, the TV playing a football game, Derek shouting about a play. They were all there, gathered as they always were, as if my invitation had never existed. Yeah, I managed my voice, cracking. I'll be fine. I hung up, set the phone face down on the pristine tablecloth, and stared at the candle flames. Their light reflected off the empty wine glasses, creating dancing shadows that offered no warmth. I felt like the whole world was celebrating connection while I sat in my expensive suit at my expensive restaurant, more alone than ever. The server approached, professional sympathy in her eyes. Will your party be arriving soon, sir? I shook my head, forcing a smile. Just me tonight. She nodded gracefully. What can I bring you? Turkey and stuffing, please. Small portions. The food arrived, beautifully plated, the turkey tender and perfectly seasoned. But every bite felt like swallowing sand. I looked at the empty chair where Patricia should have been, where Richard would have sat stiffly, where Derek and Sophie might have at least pretended to care. I imagined them at home, probably not even mentioning my absence, carrying on as if I'd never been part of their lives at all. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I'd cried enough as a child, spent too many nights wondering what I'd done wrong, why I couldn't earn their love no matter how hard I tried. But sitting there, surrounded by the sounds of other families' joy, I felt more broken than ever. What had I done wrong? I'd studied hard, built a career, sent them money, planned this dinner with such hope. Yet they'd chosen their living room over acknowledging me as family. I pushed the turkey around my plate, now cold and congealing. The server passed by periodically, her glances full of pity that made me feel worse. I reached for my phone, about to call Grandpa, one person who'd never let me down, when the restaurant door chimed. I looked up, my heart stopping. Grandpa walked in wearing his good wool overcoat, his silver hair neatly combed. He scanned the room until his eyes found me, and that familiar, loving smile spread across his weathered face. "Sorry I'm late, buddy," he said, his voice warm as summer evenings on his porch. Traffic was terrible coming up from Cincinnati. He sat across from me, reaching over to grasp my hand. His fingers were gnarled with age, but still strong, still reassuring. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I thought you weren't coming either." He shook his head, his eyes fierce with love and something else, a sadness that seemed to carry years of weight. "I'd never leave you alone, Mason, never." He squeezed my hand, and then his expression grew serious, as if preparing to share something monumental. "Mason," he said, studying my face, "do you know why I've always loved you more than all the others?" His question hit me like a physical force. I stared at him, speechless, sensing we were approaching something I'd waited my whole life to understand. "Why, Grandpa?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He took a deep breath, looking out the window where streetlights were beginning to glow in the early darkness. "There are things I should have told you years ago, but I was bound by promises. Maybe those promises have expired now." He reached into his overcoat and pulled out a manila envelope worn at the edges. He placed it on the table between us, sliding it toward me with careful deliberation. "Open it, Mason," he said. "But first, promise me something. Whatever you learn, whatever you decide, remember that you've always been loved. By me, certainly, but by others too, even if they couldn't show it." I looked at the envelope, my hands shaking as I touched it. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to learn something that would change everything. "I promise, Grandpa," I said. Grandpa nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. The restaurant noise faded to a distant hum as I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were several documents, a faded birth certificate, legal papers, and a handwritten letter on pale blue stationery. I pulled out the birth certificate first. My name was there, Mason William Patterson, but the parents' names made my blood run cold. Mother Karen Patricia Patterson, father unknown. And then in the corner, an amendment dated just weeks after my birth. Legal guardian William Patterson, Grandpa. I breathed, looking up at him. "This says you're my legal guardian, not Patricia." He nodded, his jaw tight. "Keep reading, buddy." I unfolded the legal documents next. They were custody papers signed by Karen, me, mother transferring guardianship to William Patterson, not to Patricia and Richard, to Grandpa. My hands shook as I saw Patricia's signature as a witness agreeing to provide temporary housing while William Patterson maintained legal custody. Finally, I opened the letter. My mother's handwriting was careful, looping, as if she'd taken great care with each word. "My dear Mason, by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to understand, I hope. I'm writing this in the hospital, holding you for what might be the last time, and my heart is breaking. I was 19 when you were born, too young and too lost to be the mother you deserved. Your father, well, that's a story of youth and mistakes, and he was gone before you arrived. My parents, your grandparents on my side, disowned me when I got pregnant. Only Dodonley Williams stood by me, but I was sick, Mason. Not just young and scared, but sick in ways that would have made your childhood unstable and frightening. The doctors said postpartum psychosis, but it was more than that. I couldn't trust myself with you, couldn't risk hurting the most precious thing in my life. Dad promised to take care of you. Patricia, my sister, agreed to help since Dad was still working, then traveling for the railroad. But I need you to know, giving you up wasn't about not loving you. It was the deepest act of love I could manage. I've been in and out of hospitals. Some years are better than others. Dad sends me pictures when he can, tells me about your grades, your smile, how you're growing into such a remarkable young man. I keep every photo, every update in a box by my bed. I don't know if I'll ever be stable enough to be in your life. The medications help, but they also steal pieces of me. What I want you to know is this: you were wanted. You were loved. You are loved. Every decision I made was trying to protect you from the chaos in my mind. Be angry if you need to be, but please don't ever think you weren't enough. You were everything. You were just born to a mother who couldn't trust herself to keep you safe. All my love, always, Mom. Karen. I set the letter down, tears flowing freely now. The restaurant, the candles, the empty chairs, all of it blurred as I looked at Grandpa through my tears. She's alive, I asked. He nodded. She's in a residential facility in Dayton. Has been for the past 5 years. It's her longest stable period. She wants to see you, Mason, but she's terrified. Terrified you'll hate her, terrified she'll have another episode and hurt you somehow. I thought of all the years Patricia had spoken of my mother with such disdain, painting her as selfish and irresponsible. But the truth was so much more complex, so much more painful. And Patricia, I asked, my voice hardening. She knew all of this. Grandpa's face darkened. Patricia was supposed to help raise you with love, knowing it was temporary, knowing I had legal custody. But when my Mary, your grandmother, died when you were 3, and I was grieving and still working, Patricia convinced me you needed stability. She promised to treat you like her own. He laughed bitterly. I should have seen through her resentment. She was always jealous of Karen, always felt Karen got more attention. Taking you in was supposed to be helpful, but I think she saw it as one more way Karen's problems became her burden. So I was never officially theirs, I said slowly. They couldn't have sent me away, even if they'd wanted to. No, Grandpa confirmed. You've always been mine legally. But I wanted you to have a nuclear family, a mother figure, siblings. I thought I was doing right by you. His voice broke. I'm so sorry, buddy. I should have taken you myself from the start. I reached across the table, taking his weathered hands in mine. You did what you thought was best, I said, and you were always there. Every summer, every holiday they didn't want me around, you were there. There's more, he said quietly. Pull out the last document. I found it at the bottom of the envelope. It was a will, Grandpa's will, dated just 2 months ago. I skimmed through the legal language until I reached the distributions. Everything, his house, his savings, his railroad pension, a life insurance policy I didn't know existed. Everything was left to me, to Mason William Patterson, my beloved grandson and true heir. Grandpa, I started, but he held up a hand. I'm 74, Mason. My health isn't what it was. When I go, I want you to know that everything I have is yours. Not because you're the only one who visited, not out of obligation, but because you're the only one who inherited what really mattered, your grandmother's heart. Karen's strength, despite her struggles, and hopefully some of my stubbornness. He smiled weakly. Patricia and Richard will be furious, of course. They've been counting on inheriting, especially with Derek's gambling debts and Sophie's spending. But they made their choice every time they treated you like an outsider. I stared at the will, understanding flooding through me. This was why Patricia had kept me at arm's length. I wasn't just her sister's abandoned child. I was a reminder of Karen's pain, of family obligations, and now apparently I was the sole heir to what they'd assumed would be theirs. But I don't care about the money, I said honestly. I wanted to belong. I know, buddy, Grandpa said softly, but sometimes belonging isn't about the family you're born into or placed with. Sometimes it's about choosing who deserves your love and letting them choose you back. He paused, then added, Your mother, she asks about you every time I visit. Shows me your graduation photo to anyone who'll look. She's proud of you, Mason. So very proud. I wipe my eyes, trying to process everything. My mother wasn't the selfish woman Patricia had described. She was ill fighting battles I couldn't imagine, and she'd given me up to protect me. Grandpa wasn't just my grandfather. He was my legal guardian, my protector, the one who'd ensured I always had somewhere to turn. And Patricia and Richard weren't my guardians. They were relatives who'd taken me in for appearances and convenience, always resenting the obligation. Can I started, then stopped, afraid to voice, the hope building in my chest. Can I meet her? My mom. Grandpa's eyes filled with tears. She's been waiting 29 years to hear you ask that question. Yes, Mason. Yes, you can meet her. We sat in that restaurant, the empty chairs no longer mocking me but simply irrelevant. I had Grandpa. I had the truth. And somewhere in Dayton I had a mother who'd loved me enough to let me go. The server approached and Grandpa ordered turkey with all the fixings. We ate together, him telling me stories about my grandmother, about my mother before she got sick, about the day I was born, and how he'd held me in the hospital while Karen cried and kissed my forehead over and over. She named you Mason because it means one who works with stone, he said. She said you'd need to be strong to build something solid from difficult materials. And look at you, that's exactly what you've done. As we left the restaurant, Grandpa pulled me into a hug in the parking lot. I'm proud of you, buddy, for reaching out to them, for trying. That took courage, even if they couldn't see it. What do I do now? I asked. About Patricia and Richard. Whatever feels right, he said. You don't owe them anything, Mason. You never did. The next morning I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. I drafted an email to Patricia and Richard, choosing my words carefully. Patricia and Richard, I want to thank you for providing housing during my childhood. I know it wasn't easy taking in your sister's child, and I appreciate having had shelter and stability. I've recently learned the full truth about my circumstances, about my mother's illness, about Grandpa's legal guardianship, about the promises that were made and broken. I understand now why I always felt like an outsider in your home. I wasn't what you'd chosen, but what you'd been obligated to accept. I'm writing to let you know that I'll no longer be sending monthly checks. I'll also be spending the holidays with Grandpa and exploring a relationship with my mother. I wish you and Derek and Sophie well, but I need to focus on the family who actually wants me in their lives. If you need to discuss Grandpa's decisions regarding his estate, I'd recommend speaking with him directly. Best regards, Mason. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. Within an hour, my phone exploded with calls and texts from Patricia, from Richard, even from Derek. I didn't answer. Their sudden interest in communicating with me after years of coldness told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. A week later, Grandpa and I drove to Dayton. The residential facility was nicer than I'd expected, a renovated Victorian house with a wraparound porch and gardens. My hands shook as we walked up the front steps. She might cry, Grandpa warned. She might not be able to speak at first. Be patient with her buddy. The director led us to a sunny common room, where a woman sat by the window working on a puzzle. She had sandy brown hair shot through with premature gray thin shoulders under a cardigan, and when she looked up I saw my own hazel eyes staring back at me. Mason, she whispered, her voice fragile as glass. I nodded, unable to speak. She stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might make me disappear. We stood there 3 feet apart, 29 years of separation hanging between us. You look like your grandmother, she finally said, tears streaming down her face. Same kind eyes. Mom, I said, testing the word I'd never been allowed to use. It felt foreign, but right. She sobbed, then covering her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, so very sorry. I wanted to keep you, wanted it more than anything, but I couldn't. I was so sick, and I couldn't risk. I stepped forward and pulled her into a hug. She was smaller than I'd expected, fragile, but her arms around me were strong with desperate love. I understand, I whispered. I understand, and I'm here now. We spent 3 hours in that common room. She showed me photos she'd kept, my school pictures. Grandpa had sent newspaper clippings of my academic achievements, even the announcement of my promotion at work that she'd somehow found online. She told me about her struggles, her good years and bad ones, the medications that helped but made her feel like she was living underwater. I write you letters, she admitted shyly. Have for years. Never sent them, but I have boxes full. Would you want to read them someday? Yes, I said immediately. I want to know everything. When we left, she hugged me at the door, holding on like she had 29 years ago in the hospital. Will you come back? She asked, fear naked in her voice. Next Sunday, I promised, and the Sunday after that, as often as you'll have me. Her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Over the following months, my life transformed. I visited Mom every Sunday, sometimes with Grandpa, sometimes alone. We worked puzzles, took walks in the garden, and slowly built the relationship that illness had stolen from us. She had good days and bad days, but even on the bad days, she'd light up when she saw me. I helped Grandpa update his house, preparing for the day when he might need assistance. We converted the first-floor bedroom into a suite for him, installed safety rails, made sure everything was accessible. He protested the fuss, but I could see he was relieved. I'm not going anywhere yet, buddy, he'd say. Too much to stick around for now. Patricia sent one more email, a long vitriolic message about ingratitude and manipulation, about how I'd poisoned Grandpa against them. I deleted it without responding. Derek showed up at my office once, demanding to know how I'd tricked Grandpa into changing his will. Security escorted him out. Sophie sent a text saying she'd always felt bad about how I was treated, but could I talk to Grandpa about including them? I blocked her number. They'd made their choices for 27 years. Now I was making mine. On Thanksgiving the following year, I hosted dinner at Grandpa's house. The old dining room table was set for 3, Grandpa, Mom, and me. Mom was having a good week, stable enough for an overnight visit. We cooked together, her teaching me her mother's stuffing recipe, laughing when I forgot the sage. As we sat down to eat, Mom reached for both our hands. I want to say grace, she said softly. Thank you for second chances, for forgiveness, for family that chooses each other, and for my son who became the man I always dreamed he'd be, even without me there to see it. You're here now, I said, squeezing her hand. That's what matters. After dinner, we sat on Grandpa's back porch, despite the chill, bundled in quilts, watching the stars appear. Mom dozed against my shoulder, peaceful in a way I'd rarely seen her. Grandpa smoked his pipe, the sweet tobacco scent mixing with wood smoke from the neighbor's chimney. You did good, buddy, he said quietly. Real good. I learned from the best, I replied. He chuckled. Your grandmother would be so proud. She always said love isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up again and again, especially when it's hard. I thought about Patricia and Richard probably eating their own Thanksgiving dinner, maybe wondering why I hadn't sent a check this month. I thought about Derek and Sophie still living off their parents, still waiting for an inheritance that wouldn't come. I felt no satisfaction in their disappointment, just a quiet peace in knowing I'd finally found where I belonged. As Mom stirred against my shoulder, mumbling something about making pie tomorrow, I realized that family isn't always the one you're born into or placed with. Sometimes it's the grandfather who drives 2 hours every summer to make sure you feel loved. Sometimes it's the mother who loves you enough to let you go, then spends decades hoping you'll come back. Sometimes it's the choice to keep showing up, to keep loving, even when it's complicated and imperfect. The stars wheeled overhead, and Grandpa started humming an old railroad song. Mom smiled in her sleep, and I sat there, finally home, finally whole, finally exactly where I was meant to be.